and teaches courses here in African literature. He is author of fiction and non-fiction, and his book You're Not a Country, Africa, which was published 4 years ago, has much notoriety and won him the inaugural Penguin Prize for African Writing on the year of its publication. And also his collection of poems a decade earlier, The Wayfarer and Other Poems, won the Association of Nigerian Authors National Poetry Prize. Pius is with us. He's a jet-lagged public intellectual, even if he's not sure of the label, traveling just now from Nigeria to Alberta to give lectures that have nothing to do with today's one. But today he is giving an account of reflections that come out of his first year in Africa, full year in Africa after 16 years away, on all the borders that are crisscrossing the field of African studies. For those who don't know him, Pius was trained first in Nigeria in African literature and in Lorraine, and then again for his MA in Ibadan, and came to do French studies at the University of British Columbia, where he got his PhD before I think he came to us. So it's a very big pleasure to have you to talk about your recent stuff, Pius. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dominique, for the generous introduction. Thanks for lunch, and thank you all for coming. I'm a bit rusty on this platform. I haven't been doing any of our brown bags in 2 years, so it's a pleasure and an immense honor to be back here. The key word in my title, of course, is the returnee business. You know, I'm describing myself as a returnee Africanist. Returnee in the sense that I just got back from spending a sabbatical year at the University of Ghana. And it was when I got to Ghana that it first occurred to me that in about 16 years, I don't know if it's Abu's experience too, that was the first time I was going to actually spend a whole year, an entire year in the continent. I've been away because you go in and out so often for lectures, holidays, conferences that you sort of lose that sense of the fact that you really have been away from the continent, and short visits do not in any way account for the experiences and the learning process that the longer stay affords one as a writer, a scholar, and a producer of knowledges, you know, on and about Africa. So the talk is about the ways in which I have inhabited what I'm calling borderlands and contact zones in the business of doing African studies, what this has meant for me professionally, disciplinarily, and in terms of even my agency, my ability to engage with the continent, you know, and its modes of knowledge production. So I'm hoping that this will be an interactive thing because there will be a lot of anecdotes in terms of my points of alienation, which was accentuated when actually I got to Ghana. So, so I'm hoping that as I share my experiences, my anecdotes, you'll be able to reflect on your own practices, your own location, your various positionalities and interpellations within the field of African studies, and how you have managed these tensions. But first, a word on my two key terms. You know, calling myself an Africanist of the borderlands and contact zones. Those are theoretical facts from post-colonial literary, theory. So Borderlands was coined in 1987 by somebody who is central to Chicana literary feminisms, Gloria Saldua, which she used to describe ways in which invisible borders are created between groups, between cultures, between identities, between geographies, between disciplines, and even between discursive formations, and how such invisible borders impact on practice, impact on agency, impact on subjecthood. And so it's one of those terms, theoretical terms, we traffic in post-colonial studies. Contact zones sort of came as taking borderlands into a zone where it could be critically mediated and engaged. So it was proposed by another influential literary theorist, Mary Louise Pratt. And for her contact zones, she uses it to account for areas which allow for the intermingling, because for there to be borders, there are two things in contact. The intermingling of two or more cultures, geographies, and, disciplinary formations. So she talks more about social spaces and cultural spaces where things meet and clash and how they negotiate the politics of contact and the politics of alternative. So if I take the two terms combined, being the Africanist of borderlands and the Africanist intellectual of the contact zones, what do I mean in terms of my own? It means that ever since I moved to North America in the 1990s, or maybe I should say ever since I moved to France before North America, I've had a sense of all kinds of invisible borders in the field. Being an Anglophonist and a Francophonist has given me a whole lot of experiences in terms of blocks, cliques, divisions, and I know Nduka is going to let you in on my favorite choice of words, the way I describe scholars like him and Chris, for instance, when he comes in. So I've had to negotiate borders. I've had to actuate the possibilities of contact zones in African studies. I'll give you a few experiences and then come down to how it all came together for me when I got to Ghana and was able to travel extensively, across the continent, visiting continental universities and getting a sense of points of disconnect between what they do and practice and understand as African studies and what we do here, and how they see what we do, and their expectations of what we ought to do. So these are random experiences of borders and division. And the first graduate seminar I proposed to teach at Penn State when I was hired back in 2001 as an entry-level professor was on Franz Fanon. I was in the Department of Comparative Literatures at Penn State because I was hired as a comparatist of Anglophone and Francophone African literatures and cultures. Because I was going to teach a course on Franz Fanon, I cross-listed it with the English department. And so everybody was happy about that. A doctoral seminar, a graduate seminar on Franz Fanon. And so I got almost 20 students, about 15 of them from Complete and 5 from the English department. But before we started teaching in the fall of 2001, we got a curious message from somebody I won't name because I'm sure Dominique and Chris would know the guy, who was head of African Studies then. So I've been in disciplinary tough wars with African Studies, the Center for African Studies, the Africanist Studies Center now, at Penn State, saying, hey, wait a minute. What's a course on Fanon doing in the Complete department? And why is it even cross-listed with English? I can understand if somebody is doing it in the French department because, Fanon and Francophonic colleges and all that. And there was this tough war in terms of, if you want to teach it, it should be domiciled in African studies. So bring it to African studies or teach it or take it to Pole Science. Certainly not English and literature. And you guys in literature, you are getting confused because you do all these seminars on Foucault, you do all these seminars on Derrida, you're getting confused. Are you philosophers? Are you social scientists? Are you this and that? And now you're taking it to Fanon. Fanon is a serious business for us in some fields, and you should not be encroaching. So that was one way in which I sensed that. But I haven't always been the victim. I've also been in that borderland, part of an othering process, othering machine of other colleagues, in which the tough wars over things fall apart. Part of the problem we have in teaching things fall apart in the West, for instance, is that we have a lot of trouble convincing folks that it is first and foremost art, it is aesthetics, it's got literary, artistic, and aesthetic qualities. It is a work of art. And colleagues, Africanist colleagues, all over the disciplines then complicate our problem. Because every time I got invited in the US for a class visit to teach things for apart, I got more invitations from colleagues in history, in pole science, in sociology, in anthropology, using that text as some kind of introduction to Africa. And all these guys, what are they doing poaching? What are they doing encroaching? And all that. So I've not always been at the receiving end. And I will visit those classes, but warn the colleagues, I hope you know that you are encroaching, you are poaching. And I'm sure that I was wise enough to start removing films from my syllabi the moment Apple was hired. I'm sure I did that. I started, carefully removing African films from my syllabi when Apple came around, because I didn't want those maybe he would have forgiven me for my Francophone side, and all that.
Does that mean I need to take Things Fall Apart off my syllabus?
But that's just one part of life in these contact zones and borderlands and negotiations with, so there's the Anglophonic, Francophonic thing, the disciplinary things and all that. A more serious aspect of it, maybe the face-offs across geographies and the ways in which I have experienced that over the years. One good example, and then I'll come, no, two examples, and I'll come to Ghana, how Ghana put put that together for me, in terms of what it means to do it here and what it means to do it in the continent. I got involved in, Dominic was asking me how I came to be called a public intellectual. I forgot to tell you that Tony Falola's listserv also contributed to are you an it person? The USA Africa Dialogue listserv, which Tony Falola founded, I think about almost 6,000, Nduka, you're there, right? Almost 6,000 to 7,000 Africanists on that listserv. Everybody from Mazui to all they're there. One or two books have now been published actually on that listserv in terms of the ways in which it is competing with HNet. But there is about 5,000 Africanist scholars and activists and intellectuals there. The USA Africa Dialogue, it is called. So USA Africa, Africanists here and Africanists on the continent. When Falola started that listserv, tough wars broke out very rapidly in the 90s in terms of colleagues in the continent, being very hostile to those of us here. Every contribution you made was delegitimized on account of your location. Hey, those of us who are in it, who are doing it, always a sense of latent accusations of betrayal. You abandoned the continent, you left, the knowledge is you're producing, somebody would mention courses they're teaching about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and somebody would respond from Kenya or maybe Malawi and immediately start the legend. Do you know that the Ngugi of North America, of the global north, is slightly different from the Ngugi of the global south? And also all those early, and these are very, very major voices in African studies doing back and forth and fighting. And I got drawn into it one day because, again, the usual debates, and a colleague in Ibadan then attacked me and phrased it in terms of those of us who had abandoned the African classroom. If you have abandoned the African classroom, you are, and this, unfortunately for him, I had only just begun to teach AFRI 1001 when this fight started. Those of you who have abandoned the African classroom should not be talking when we're talking. So I threw it to the house. What is the African classroom? When is the African classroom? Is the African classroom that is your understanding of the authentic African classroom, that idea of essentialized idea of lack, children gathered under a baobab tree, maybe in Ibadan, or in Ouagadougou, or in Bamako, being taught with crayons and chalks and pencils donated by UNICEF, with hyenas screaming in the background. That would be authentic African classroom, or maybe the classrooms in Ibadan. Everything is dilapidated and all that. Is that what you mean by the What do you mean by it? And then people started arguing back and forth, trying to conceptualize what does it have to be located in Africa. Then Professor Falola asked me, by the way, Pius, you started this debate. Why did you ask that question? What is the African classroom? When is the African classroom? I said, well, first and foremost, the guy who accused those of us of abandoning the African classroom to do African studies in North America was attacking me from Rhodes University in South Africa. He's a Nigerian based in there now. He's moved to Pretoria. And he said, you guys, I've been to Rhodes. I can understand if you are even saying it from the University of the Zululand. Or of the, you are in Rhodes, and you are attacking somebody in Canada or in the US for abandoning their African classroom. When you left Ibadan for Rhodes, is Rhodes an African classroom the same way as Ibadan is? So I'm complicating things for him. Secondly, I am teaching a course now here at Carleton. And then I quickly had my TA. The students didn't know the reason why I needed to know the nationalities of all the African students in the class. But I had my TA. So many African students in that inaugural Africa 1001, course. And I think I ended up with about 25 nationalities in that course I was doing at the Adesanmi Theater. So I said, look, I am, as we speak, teaching a course in which I have 25 African countries present. Now show me a classroom in the continent where you are going to get that. Where, at best, if you are in Ibadan, you have 1 or 2 students from Cameroon. That's it. Maybe in South Africa, you have to go to a stretch before you assemble 5 countries. I have 25. So, is that an African classroom? So, what is an African? So, we had, I'm not sure how we concluded that debate, but I was able to complicate understandings that you don't have that simplistic idea of location, in terms of what the African classroom is. No sooner had one come out of that problem than those of us in literatures faced another one, which was the initial controversies surrounding the Nigerian Prize for Literature. That prize is a funny prize because it has political and ideological implications. Part of the conscience cleaning exercise of Shell and the petroleum industry generally in Nigeria, NLG and all those. After killing Kensaro Wiwa, was to start pumping money in his immediate constituency. So they inaugurated the Nigerian Prize for Literature, $100,000. So it's the biggest literary prize in terms of money in Africa. And certainly one of the biggest, the Cane is not as big as it is, the Hemingway is not so. One of the biggest, by $100,000, you get that check, it does not bounce. So they are serious about it. They are serious about it. So, the prize is inaugurated, and immediately the literary establishment in Nigeria started, all the arguments we thought that we had done in Makerere in 1962. What is African literature? Who is an African writer? Who is a producer of African literary knowledge? If you're not based in Nigeria, if you're not based in the continent, you're not qualified for this prize. So who is a Nigerian writer? And the debate just extended beyond that prize, into questions of location, into questions of who is the genuine writer of the representative, the home versus diaspora thing. If you're doing African literatures, it extended beyond creative writers to even the scholarship of the literature. What kinds of knowledges are you? So it was, when did we resolve? It was almost like a 3-year battle. And those of us here kept reminding them, what you're doing has very, very serious implications. For if you succeed in projecting this idea, this idea that authentic Nigerian writing, authentic Nigerian literary studies must be produced by Nigerians based in Nigeria. Dangers, are there. and all that. So again, experiences of the borderlands. So when I got to Ghana, my brief in Ghana, actually as, because I got the Carnegie thing. I got the Carnegie thing. And in fact, the story of how I even got the Carnegie thing speaks to ideas of location and borderlands and whatever. I was on my way to the University of Johannesburg. You remember, I had gotten a visiting professorship at the University of Johannesburg. So I was negotiating, everything was done, except for the fact that because they were foot dragging in signing the final, the Dean of Arts there was doing a little bit of foot dragging in signing the final agreement, and whatever. Then I got my promotion. Then my promotion came through here while they were still in the process. So I wrote him, I said, the accommodation you had provided, because I studied, I went here, I said, I'm now entitled to accommodation as a full professor. I said, everything has changed. And so I just changed everything. Tadi Aina, who was then the project head of the Carnegie Higher Education in Africa program in New York, was visiting. And the dean asked him, do you know this guy? He's like, of course I know him. Yeah, we have given him these, and now all of a sudden he's changing the rules because can you talk to me? Tadi phones me from Johannesburg and said, what is this? I hear you have a sabbatical and you are coming to South Africa. No. We have a lot of projects in Africa proper. That's a Nigerian speaking from Johannesburg. You live in Canada, you're coming to Johannesburg. It's the same Global North African Studies. We need somebody like you, brain gain for Africa. So, we have all these Carnegie projects going on. I think I'm going to send you to Ghana. So find a way to decline these guys. That was the guy they had asked to convince me to come. So that's how I ended up. And the brief in Ghana, the school is in transition. I'm sure you know this, Chris. The identity crisis, moving from the British model, the University of Legon, to the North American model. So my brief is to go and help that transition at the graduate level at the Institute of African Studies. So I had to redesign the entire program at the Institute of graduate program there, design courses, North America based, like graduate courses, do capacity building, because the faculty members there aren't used to teaching graduate seminars the way. So I did about 15 workshops, different workshops in graduate studies for faculty members, help with library. And so it was in the course of this thing. Akuswa, the director, Akuswa, and some of the guys would call me and say, Pius, there's a North American ideological approach to African studies, to some of this stuff you're doing. And I would ask them, what does that even mean? As opposed to whatever their sense of the identity, the issues, and the agendas of continental African studies, So I became a student. I was doing my work, but I became a student too, in terms of the ways in which colleagues were framing me as at once internal and external, the insider, the outsider, and all that. Because you guys, because if you're here, African studies is African studies. We go, we come, we have ongoing collaborations with colleagues across the continent, but all of a sudden, folks are letting you know that there are minor things. Even the framing of some of the courses that you are, so we had that. And I'll come to specifics when we throw this up, because I also want to hear your experiences, and then, of course, I got invitations to Nigerian universities, I went around the continent, and that sense of African studies in the global north versus African studies in